You're sitting at your kitchen table. The bills are stacked up next to the phone, and you're telling yourself the same thing I told myself for the better part of 30 years, that your job is the one thing in this world that can't be taken away from you. I believed that with everything I had. I was wrong. Dead wrong. A steady pay packet is not safety. It's the last thing to fall. And by the time it falls, the warning signs have already been flashing right in front of you for months, sometimes years. The old Australians who lived through the real crashes knew how to read those signs. They watched a downturn coming the way a farmer watches a storm build on the horizon, quietly, early, and without panic. I want to give you what they knew, because by the end of this, I'll show you a single line buried in a government report from 1932 that spells out exactly what a job market collapse looks like before it ever arrives. And you don't need money in the bank, a business, or a scrap of land to use any of it. You just need to know what to look for from the very chair you're sitting in right now. I still remember the morning it clicked for me. It was 1991, and I was standing in the smoko room at a workshop in the western suburbs, watching a bloke named Kevin clean out his locker with shaking hands. He'd been there 22 years. He thought he was untouchable. And I remember thinking, that'll never be me, right before I spent the next 2 decades making every single mistake he made. So let me start with the belief that cost me the most. I always thought that having a job meant I was covered. Show up, work hard, keep your nose clean, and the pay keeps coming. That was the deal. That was the whole religion I was raised in. But here's the contradiction nobody explained to me. A job is not something you own. It's something you rent, one fortnight at a time, from a company that can cancel the lease the moment the numbers stop working in their favor. And they always see the numbers before you do. Let me take you back to 1990 and 91, to what our own treasurer at the time called the recession we had to have. Now think about that phrase for a second. The recession we had to have. That's a fancy way of saying somebody somewhere decided that a whole lot of ordinary working Australians were going to lose their livelihoods on purpose, as a kind of medicine for the economy. By the end of 1992, unemployment in this country hit almost 11%. Nearly 1 in every 9 working Australians who wanted a job couldn't get one. Whole factories that had run for 40 years went dark. And here's the part that still makes my stomach turn. The warning signs had been showing up on the shop floor for a good 18 months before the axe came down. I saw them. I just didn't know what I was looking at. The first sign was the overtime drying up. For years, there'd always been Saturday work if you wanted it. Then quietly, without any announcement, the overtime sheet just stopped going up on the wall. Nobody said a word. That was sign number 1, and I missed it completely. The second sign was the casuals disappearing before anyone permanent was touched. Companies always cut the casuals and the contractors first, because they're cheap to let go. When you notice the casual faces vanishing one by one, that's not a coincidence. That's the tide going out before the wave. The third sign was the hiring freeze, that nobody calls a hiring freeze. Somebody retires, somebody moves on, and their job just never gets filled. The rest of you quietly absorb the extra work. Management calls it efficiency. What it really is a business that stopped investing in the future because it doesn't believe there is one. The fourth sign was the sudden obsession with meetings about productivity and restructuring. When the men in the good shirts start walking the floor with clipboards, they are not there to give you a pay rise. And the fifth sign, the one that Kevin missed and I missed right alongside him, was the supplier orders shrinking. When the raw materials coming in the back door slow down, the work going out the front door is about to slow down too. The bloke on the forklift knows a downturn is coming weeks before the boardroom will admit it out loud. 5 signs. I lived through all 5 in 1991 and read exactly none of them, because I'd been taught my whole life that reading them wasn't my job. But that raises a far bigger question, doesn't it? If these signs are so obvious once you know them, why did nobody ever teach us to look? Why were people like me, and probably people like you, raised to keep our heads down and trust the system right up until the moment it dropped us? Because somebody profits enormously from you believing your job is safe. Think about who wins when you feel secure. The bank that just signed you up to a 30-year mortgage wins, because a frightened, cautious worker doesn't borrow $400,000. The company you work for wins, because a worker who believes they're indispensable will accept less, complain less, and stay longer than one who knows the truth. And the whole machine of easy credit and steady spending only keeps turning as long as millions of us keep believing that the pay packet will always be there. Your confidence is worth money to people who are not you. That's the part that took me years to understand. There's an old idea our grandparents lived by that got quietly buried sometime after the Second World War. They called it never letting one master hold all your bread. A man in the bush 100 years ago didn't have one job. He had a patchwork. He'd shear, and he'd fence, and he'd grow a bit, and he'd trade a bit. If one thing failed, 3 others held him up. That wasn't backwards. That was insurance. Real insurance. The kind you can't be denied. Somewhere along the line we were sold a different story. We were told that the modern sophisticated thing to do was to specialize. Pick one trade, one employer, one income, and pour everything into it. Give one master all your bread. And for a while, in the good years, that looked smart. But it left an entire generation with no backup at all. One phone call, one restructure, one bad quarter, and the whole thing collapses. So let me give you the next set of signs. The ones that show up not on the factory floor, but in the wider world around you, if you know where to look. Sign number 6 is the ads. Watch the job ads in your own trade, your own town, your own industry. Not the national figures on the news, which lag months behind, the actual listings. When they thin out, when the same 3 ads keep getting reposted week after week because nobody's being hired, the market near you is already freezing over. Sign number 7 is the restructure that keeps the same number of jobs but changes them all to contract or labor hire. When permanent roles quietly turn into gigs, the company is telling you plainly that it no longer wants to be responsible for you next year. Sign number 8 is wage growth that stops keeping up with your grocery bill. If your pay hasn't moved in 2 years but your trolley now costs $60 more than it used to, you are already taking a pay cut every single week. That's not stability. That's a slow bleed most people never even notice until it's drained them. Sign number 9 is the rise of what I call the grateful worker. When you start hearing people say they're just lucky to have a job, when the mood at work shifts from confident to grateful, the balance of power has already tipped. Grateful workers don't ask for more, and bosses know it. Sign number 10 is the company that suddenly stops spending on the small things. The good coffee disappears. The Christmas do gets canceled. The old ute doesn't get replaced. Businesses cut the little visible comforts long before the big cuts, because the little cuts don't make the paper. Sign number 11 is the overqualified newcomer. When people far more experienced than the job requires start applying for basic roles in your area, it means good people higher up the ladder have already been pushed off it, and they're reaching down for whatever they can hold. And sign number 12 is the one that hides in plain sight. The endless talk of resilience and adapting to change. Whenever the people at the top start using a lot of soft words about resilience, brace yourself. They are preparing you to accept a loss they've already decided you're going to take. Now I can hear some of you already. You're thinking, that's all very well for a bloke with skills and savings, but I've got neither. I'm renting, I'm getting older, I've got nothing put by, and reading warning signs won't pay my rent when the work stops. I want to speak to you directly now, because this next part is for you specifically. This is the part that works whether you own a house or a caravan, whether you've got $40,000 in the bank or 40. You do not need money to do what I'm about to tell you. You need nothing but the willingness to do one small thing differently starting this weekend. Here's what the old people understood that we forgot. Security was never really about how much money you had. It was about how many things you could do, how many people owed you a good turn, and how little you actually needed to get by. Those three things cost nothing to build, and no employer, no bank, no downturn can take them from you. Let me make that practical, right inside the home you already live in. The first thing is what I'd call the second string. The old-timers never had one skill. They had a spare. Whatever you do for a living, there is one thing you already know how to do that someone near you would pay a little for. Fixing things, minding kids or animals, cooking, mending, driving, doing the books, growing a few vegetables to swap over the fence. You don't wait until the job's gone to start that string. You start it while you're still working, quietly, one small job at a time. It doesn't have to replace your wage. It just has to prove to you that your wage is not the only thing standing between you and the wolf. I started mine after Kevin. I began fixing small engines, mowers, whippersnippers, the odd chainsaw, out of my own shed on weekends. $20 here, $40 there. Nothing to write home about. But the year the regular work went thin, that little shed put food on my table, and it did something even more important. It broke the spell. It proved to me that I was not one phone call away from ruin, the way Kevin had felt on his last day. And that changes how you sleep at night. The second thing is cutting your number. Every household has a number, the amount you truly need each month to keep the lights on and food in the belly. Most of us have never once sat down and worked out what that real number is, because we're too frightened to look. But the lower you can get that number, the less power any employer or crash has over you. Every dollar you learn to do without in the good times is a dollar of freedom in the bad times. And here's where cutting that number stops being a worry and starts being a habit you can actually feel. That's the whole reason I put down everything I learned into a set of books. Aussie Basics, Deep Thrift, and the Full System. They walk you through the forgotten Australian ways to keep milk, butter, meat, and eggs fresh for days, with little or no power, using the old Coolgardie safe method you can build tonight from things already in your kitchen. They show you how to slash that humming fridge's around-the-clock drain by chilling and storing the smart way our grandparents did, without buying a single new appliance. And they hand you real templates you can print and stick on the fridge, a pantry checklist, a weekly meal and power plan, a preserving calendar, so an ordinary rented house or small unit becomes self-reliant against rising costs, without more money, credit, or expensive gear. Don't take my word for it. Tonight, before you go to bed, wet a clean cloth, drape it over a bowl of butter in a shaded spot with a little airflow, and see for yourself how much cooler it keeps by morning. No power at all. That's the same principle the whole collection is built on, and you can test it for free right now. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description, or the pinned comment. And the beauty of this is, it's the same discipline the survivors used. Needing less is a shield that works in any year, good or bad. Now let me show you the third thing, because it's the one that mattered most of all when the money stopped. That's not being tight. That's the oldest form of protection there is. The third thing is your web of good turns. The old Australians survived the hard years not on money but on each other. You helped your neighbor dig his spuds, and when your roof leaked he was up the ladder before you asked. That web is worth more than any savings account when the money stops, and you build it for free, one favor at a time, starting with the people either side of your own fence. None of that needs land. None of it needs capital. All of it can start this weekend, from the house you're in, with the skills already in your two hands. But here's where it gets serious. And here's where I have to tell you about the thing I found buried in the archives, because it changes everything about how you should be watching the months ahead. I always assumed the crashes of the past just came out of nowhere, a bolt from the blue. That's how they're always described. Sudden, unforeseeable, nobody could have known. But that is a lie, and I can prove it to you. Go back to the Great Depression in this country. By 1932, Unemployment in Australia had reached almost 30%. Nearly a third of working men had no work at all. Think about your own street. Now imagine 1 in every 3 houses with no wage coming in. That's what it was. Families split up so the kids could be fed. Grown men walked from town to town looking for a day's labor. It was the worst economic disaster this nation has ever seen. And everybody says it came without warning. Except it didn't. Not for the people who knew how to read the signs. I went digging through the old records, the way I've learned to do, and I found something that stopped me cold. In the years right before the Depression bit, the warning signs were everywhere for anyone willing to see them. Wool prices, the backbone of the whole Australian economy back then, had been sliding for years. Overseas borrowing had ballooned to the point where the country was drowning in debt it couldn't service. And building work, the thing that always goes first, had already collapsed in the cities well before the official crash. The people who lost the least were not the richest. They were the ones who'd kept the old habits, the ones who'd never given one master all their bread, who grew a bit of their own food, who owed nobody and needed little. Country families who'd been laughed at for being old-fashioned in the roaring good years suddenly found they were the ones still standing when the city fell. That's sign number 13, and it's the biggest one of all. When everyone around you is celebrating how good things are, when the borrowing is easy and the spending is loud and the caution has vanished from every face, that is not the top of a mountain you can stay on. That is the edge of a cliff. The good times are not the opposite of the crash. They are the warning sign for it. Sign number 14 is debt getting easier to get, not harder. When lenders start chasing you, offering you more than you asked for, loosening the rules, that is a system trying to keep the party going past closing time. It never ends well. Sign number 15 is the whole country leaning on 1 or 2 industries. In the 30s it was wool and farm exports. When too many eggs sit in too few baskets, one shock overseas knocks the whole thing over. Look around your own region. If your town lives and dies on one big employer or one single industry, you are more exposed than you think. Sign number 16 is prices for the things you sell, your labor, your product, your time, going soft while the things you buy keep climbing. That gap is where families get crushed, quietly, long before any headline calls it a crash. Sign number 17 is the young ones not being able to get a start. When the school leavers and the apprentices can't find a first job, that's the bottom of the ladder rotting out. And a ladder always rots from the bottom up. Sign number 18 is the mood. And I know that sounds soft, but the old people took it deadly seriously. When fear replaces confidence in ordinary conversation, when people stop talking about what they're going to buy and start talking about what they're going to cut, that shift in the air is real. And it moves through a community faster than any official figure ever will. Now here's the villain in all of this, and it's not one man or one company. It's a machine, and I want you to see it clearly. The whole modern setup depends on you being a good, steady, predictable spender. It needs you confident. It needs you borrowing. It needs you believing that tomorrow will look like today. Because the moment millions of people get cautious all at once, the whole thing seizes up. So there is a constant, quiet pressure, through the ads, through the news, through the very way we're taught to think about work, to keep you feeling secure long past the point where security is real. The old self-reliance was inconvenient to that machine. A family that grew its own food, fixed its own gear, needed little and owed nothing, was a family the machine couldn't steer. So that way of living got painted as backwards, quaint, something your nan did because she didn't know better. And the modern way, one job, one income, plenty of debt, and total trust in the system, got sold to us as progress. But it wasn't progress. It was a leash, and most of us have been wearing it our whole working lives, without ever feeling the weight of it, right up until the day it pulls tight. Let me give you the next signs, because now we're getting to the ones that matter most for the year ahead. Sign number 19 is your own workplace going quiet at the top. When the bosses stop making promises about the future, when the 5-year plans and the big talk simply stop, that silence is louder than any announcement. People stop promising things they no longer believe in. Sign number 20 is the voluntary redundancy offer. When a company starts asking people to leave willingly with a payout, understand what that really is. It's the polite round. The impolite round comes next, and it doesn't come with a payout. Sign number 21 is the outsourcing of anything that used to be done in-house. When the cleaning, the payroll, the maintenance, the little jobs all get shipped out to contractors, the company is learning how to run without its own people. And once it learns that, it doesn't forget. Sign number 22 is the sudden interest in what you actually do all day. Timesheets, activity logs, justify your role. When you're asked to prove your worth on paper, someone upstairs is already building a list, and you do not want to be on the wrong end of it. Every one of those signs is showing up somewhere in this country right now. And every one of them is exactly the kind of thing that a worker in 1990 or 1932 would have recognized in a heartbeat, if only anyone had bothered to teach us to look. So now let me give you the thing I promised you at the start, the buried line, the proof. When I was going through the records from the Depression years, I came across the reports and the inquiries that tried, afterwards, to work out what had gone so horribly wrong. How a wealthy young country had let a third of its workers fall into ruin. And in amongst all the dry official language about credit and exports and government finances, I found the truth that had been sitting there in plain sight the whole time, written down by people who watched it happen. The collapse, they concluded, was not sudden at all. The signs had been visible for years. The borrowing had been reckless. The reliance on a handful of exports had been dangerous, and the ordinary warning signals had all been flashing. What made it a catastrophe was not that the signs were hidden. It was that a whole nation had been trained to ignore them, to trust that the good times would simply continue, and to treat the old habits of caution and self-reliance as something to be embarrassed about. Read that again, slowly. The disaster wasn't the lack of warning, it was the lack of listening. The people who came through it best were not the clever and the rich. They were the ones who'd quietly kept doing what their grandparents did, needing little, doing much, and never handing all their bread to a single master. And that is the finale. That's the whole secret, and it's almost insultingly simple. You cannot stop a crash. No worker ever could. But you can make yourself the kind of household that a crash cannot break. And you do it exactly the way the survivors of 1932 did it, using nothing but the skills in your hands, the discipline to need less, and the neighbors over your fence. Here's the thing, you can do this very weekend, and it's the oldest trick in the book. Sit down at that kitchen table and write 2 lists. On the first list, write down every single thing you know how to do that another human being might pay you for, no matter how small. On the second list, write down every regular expense you have and put a mark next to the 3 you could live without if you had to. That's it. That's the whole method. One list is your second string, the other is your lower number. Do that one thing, and you have done more to protect yourself than any promise your employer will ever make you. Because signs number 23, 24, and 25 are not out there in the economy at all. They're in your own house. Sign number 23 is having only one source of income. Sign number 24 is not knowing your real monthly number. And sign number 25, the most dangerous of the lot, is believing that none of this could ever happen to you. That's the exact belief I carried into that smoko room in 1991. And it's the belief I'm begging you to put down today. I spent 30 years thinking a steady wage was the safest thing a man could have. I know now it was the most fragile, because it was the only thing I had. Don't wait for your own Kevin moment to learn what I learned too late. You are not the kind of person who's content to be kept comfortable and unprepared, or you'd have switched this off 10 minutes ago. You're the kind who'd rather know the hard truth and act on it than be soothed by a comfortable lie. So act on it. Start the 2 list this weekend. Start the 2nd string this month. And stop handing all your bread to one master, the way your own grandparents knew never to do. Now I want to hear from you. Of those 25 signs, tell me which one you've already seen with your own eyes where you live. The overtime drying up, the casuals vanishing, the young ones who can't get a start, whatever it was that made the hair on your neck stand up. Leave it in the comments below, and tell me which town or which part of the country you're watching from, because I read them, and it matters to know where these signs are showing up first. And if you're done being sold the expensive, comfortable version of a simple truth, if you want to stand with the people who refuse to keep believing the convenient lie that the system will always catch them, then come along with me. Because next time, I'm going to show you the forgotten Depression-era pantry method that let ordinary families eat well on almost nothing, using foods that are still sitting on your supermarket shelf right now for a fraction of what everyone else pays. I found it in an old Country Women's Association handbook, and I promise you, once you see it, you'll never fill your trolley the same way again. This video showed you the shape of it, but the full walkthrough, sign by sign, is waiting inside the Bush Wisdom Circle. In there, you can ask me your own question about your own situation, and a real person me answers you back. You won't be doing this alone. Folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel any time, one click. No risk at all.